Welcome to the Archive Network. I'm Aurelius, and with me, as always, Malik. We curate the treaty archive. Today we open a new file, Maastricht Treaty. Malik, you've had this one on your desk for a while. In the early 1990s, Europe found itself at a crossroads like never before. The Cold War had drawn to a close, yet the uncertainty hung heavy in the air. New dangers were surfacing as old rivalries began to resurface, stirring fears of conflict. We had to ask ourselves, would these nations come together in a shared vision, or would they splinter apart once more? The stakes were unprecedented. Peace and stability weren't just ideals. They were necessities for survival in a rapidly changing world.
Aurelius, that moment was more than just uncertainty. It was a reckoning. The collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't merely a geopolitical shift. It unleashed ethnic tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Entire nations suddenly found themselves wrestling with identities they hadn't had to define in years. Families were torn apart, and communities fractured. This wasn't just about changing borders. It was deeply personal, affecting real lives and relationships in ways we still feel today.
You're correct about identities, Malik. But look at the European community. It had already unified 12 nations under economic agreements. The Single European Act of 1986 was a significant step forward. It pushed countries closer together, even if disparities became glaring. The North and West often clashed with the South and East. We saw nations trying to balance their interests, yet old rivalries lingered. This tension is a reminder that unity doesn't erase differences. It often highlights them.
But that's the problem, Aurelius. Those economic agreements masked deeper issues that couldn't be ignored. The disparities you mention were not just numbers on a page. They represented real lives and stories. Southern countries felt abandoned while the North thrived, and many people lost hope. You talk about unification, but what about the voices that were left unheard? Those are the stories that need to be told. That's the true human cost of these decisions.
True. But the reunification of Germany in 1990 changed everything. It created a political and economic giant in the heart of Europe, reshaping the continent's landscape. For many, this was a culmination of the European project, a long-held dream. Yet, we can't ignore how France and the UK watched with unease. Memories of a dominant Germany lingered in their minds, raising fears of an imbalance that could shift the power dynamics in Europe once more and stir old rivalries.
And that fear wasn't unfounded. The concerns of France and the UK really highlight the underlying tensions. It wasn't just about economics. It was about power dynamics, too. A reunified Germany could easily overshadow its neighbors, leaving them feeling vulnerable. Leaders had to navigate these fears while pushing for deeper integration. The stakes were so much higher than just trade agreements. They were about people's lives and the future of nations.
Exactly. Amidst these changes, the Delors Report emerged in 1990. It proposed an economic and monetary union complete with a single currency. For some, this felt like a logical progression, a necessary step toward unity. But for others, especially in the UK, it was a looming threat to national sovereignty. They worried that Brussels could overshadow member states, undermining their autonomy. Such debates are not new. They echo throughout history, as we see power dynamics shift and evolve.
Aurelius, this isn't just a matter of opinion. The UK's resistance wasn't merely skepticism. It was a deep-rooted concern for national identity. John Major's government feared that the UK would be swallowed whole, losing its unique character. The narrative that emerged, autonomy versus integration, wasn't just an abstract debate. It affected real lives and communities. People felt it, and that debate would shape not just politics, but the core of Europe's future.
The Gulf War further complicated matters. It exposed the European community's weaknesses in a stark light, revealing how member states struggled to act as one cohesive entity. This embarrassment only reinforced the idea that a united Europe was necessary. We realized that only through unity could we safeguard our collective interests in a rapidly changing global landscape. But let's be honest, achieving that unity was no simple task. History shows us that alliances are tricky, and we were just beginning to understand this reality.
And yet, the urgency of unity came with its own challenges. When leaders met in Rome in December 1990, they carried not just hopes, but fears. Each country arrived with its ambitions, but also with deep-seated anxieties about their pasts. The negotiations weren't merely about policy, they were about identity and trust. Could they truly overcome centuries of mistrust? As they sat around that table, the weight of their people's expectations pressed heavily on their shoulders.
Those tensions were palpable, Malika. The agenda was nothing short of transformative. Economic and monetary union, political union, and a common foreign policy. France and Germany were all in, pushing hard for deeper integration. Meanwhile, the UK was digging in its heels, seeking opt-outs to maintain its autonomy. Each country had its priorities, and then they were quite different. But the real question was whether they could ever find common ground. History has shown us that compromise is often a delicate dance.
Finding common ground was nearly impossible. The stakes weren't just economic. They were existential. Would the community fracture under competing interests? That fear of chaos loomed large for everyone involved. The outcome of these negotiations could either forge a new Europe or plunge the continent back into division. You could see it on people's faces, the worry, the uncertainty. Families depended on these decisions. It wasn't just about politics. It was about real lives, real futures hanging in the balance.
Now, the diplomats must act. They're grappling with daunting questions of sovereignty and unity that could reshape borders and alliances. The world is watching closely, waiting for any sign of compromise or conflict. In the next episode, we'll step inside the negotiation rooms of Maastricht itself. There, ambitions will clash, egos will flare, and history will be made. We'll witness the intricate dance of diplomacy as these leaders try to forge a path forward amidst uncertainty.
That's where we leave it for now. Part 1 of 5, Maastricht Treaty, is far from done. If you're new here, we're Aurelius and Malik, curators of the Treaty Archive, part of the Archive Network. Part 2 drops soon.